Our second episode of Control Shift, starring Nik Patel. Really excited to do this. We're United Effects Ventures. We like to build startups, and as part of that, we invest in community, and we want to make sure that we're helping founders, anybody, technologists, and just about anybody who's interested to have the skills and knowledge necessary to build products. And a big part of that is understanding how to work with the current state of technology. So we're really proud to be bringing this series with AI, helmed by Nik Patel here, an AI advisor to UEV. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to you, Nik. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. Great to have you here. Thanks for joining. This is going to be a 2-hour session. We are going to talk a lot about coding itself and how do we code in the world of AI. We will be going into code, but at the same time, I do want to have some conversation at a high level on what sort of advancements we have seen, specifically in 2025. It's been a crazy year for coding assistants, even more than what ChatGPT felt like when it came out. It's been, what, 3-4 years at this point. So we'll be talking through that, what sort of practices are working, what sort of practices are not working. The first session that we did was much more around how do you think about AI and how AI gets into your workflow. Today, let's get hands-on, which means there will be demos, and in a standard fashion, because it's going to be demos, we'll be doing things on the fly. So I think there has been sayings of like, when demo gods are not happy, demo don't go well. In the case of GenAI, it's actually even more harder to know what to expect, just because it's not like you say 1 + 1 and GenAI always thinks it's 2, right? It's just tokens that could also decide it could be 11. If you don't know what I mean, go ask if 0.9 is better than 0.11, and GenAI would probably say 0.11 is more than 0.9. So that tells you something about how much it knows about math. So what I want to do now is want to go through some quick poll just to know the audience. I think, like I said, I know pretty much everyone, but still probably would be good to get a quick understanding. And then we'll go through a quick deck, and then I'll flip-flop between deck and code, so we can talk about certain things, see how it works in code, and on and on. High level, let's keep this conversational. I know everyone's off camera. If you want to come on camera, feel free to. Just know that this session is being recorded and will probably be, not probably, will be put on YouTube for others to see in future. That said, yeah, you're welcome to come on camera. You're welcome to ask questions along the way. I am logged into 2 machines. So my camera is on my desktop, and then everything that I share will be from my laptop. So if you see me looking down, it's mainly because I'm actually looking at my laptop. All right, with that, let's get started. Let me join from, or sorry, share my screen from my laptop, and we'll get going. All right, everyone's able to see the screen? That is a yes. Thanks, Ethan. All right, so I think first thing I'd love to know, actually, here, let me just look at some names. Yeah, I know the answer. I was going to ask like how many years since you have been in the industry. I think I know the answer for most of it. But let me ask this. How would you rate your skills when it comes to coding, or more so coding using AI assistants? Doesn't matter what you use. If you're a Copilot person or a Cloud Code person, that's irrelevant. I'm more interested in how would you rate your skills, just so I know how deep to go in certain sections or not to go deep in certain sections. Let me see if we could do a poll. Actually, just a quick chat message would work. If you could just put that in chat on beginner, advanced, or mid, that would be helpful. And I'll keep moving. Okay, a little bit about myself. Been in the industry for quite some time. I remember the days when we were doing ASPX and web forms, 90s technologies, and now I I know of days where I'm not doing pretty much any coding. It's mainly prompting, and AI is writing a lot of the code for me. So we have come a long way. Been advising few startups, and then I have also co-authored 5 patents when I was a CTO and co-founder at Cohesion. Okay, so let's talk about coding assistant shift. Specifically, I wanted to start with this. So we have a reference in terms of how things have been shifting, moving, and how fast it's been moving. Um, the autocomplete piece, if you have used any sort of IDE is integrated development environment, essentially something like Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, JetBrains, Rider, any things like that. Autocomplete has been around for ages, and we have seen this shift to go from autocomplete to agentic, where the focus is not on writing the code, but orchestrating agents and systems so that they can write the code, and as a human we can evaluate. Model context protocol, which was announced late last year, has become the standard for any sort of integrations that happens with LLMs. Thanks, Jason, on the skills. The As for MCP, the reason I'm mentioning it here is because we'll talk about how to use MCP in the context of coding assistance. We are also starting to see that the world is moving from let's work on one file or multiple files to work across multiple repos. In fact, all of the companies that offer any sort of agents, coding agents and assistants are moving in that direction. They are becoming more enterprise ready. They're focusing on how to help enterprises. It also helps them with the growth and whatnot. So we are starting to see more and more agents are doing long running sessions versus do a small to-do task and be done with it. My longest session with the coding assistant without me getting involved whatsoever came yesterday, when Claude Code, after some stuff that I did, basically did run for about hour and a half without me needing to do anything. And for what it's worth, it actually did write a good code because there were some guardrails put in place. And then last but not the least, I think from a pricing perspective, we are also starting to see that the shift of, instead of going after token-based pricing, now it's more session-based pricing. Initially, Claude Code started that, but we are starting to see more and more companies doing it now, including Codex and some of the other large companies. Speaking of how fast things move, let's see what happened just in last 7 days. OpenAI had their dev day. They basically announced agent SDK. They announced agent workflows, evals. MCP is available more generally now. Codex has more options than it did before. Codex is equivalent of Claude Code, but from OpenAI. So a lot more just in that company. Anthropic announced Sonnet 4.5, which has been some time being like more than a week. But also, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, they announced something called plugins. It's not something I have gone deep into, but we'll work through it together to see what that is, because it is extremely relevant for what we are going to talk about today. And then they announced that IBM partnership. The other thing that they announced was multi-agent runs, and something that we'll look into today as well. On top of that, Google announced that some of their tools will be deprecated. They are going into agent mode. Some of the models will be deprecated as well. GitHub announced agent mode changes. Cursor announced plan mode, but also BugBot, which basically can squash bugs and create PRs behind the scene. Client announced some stuff. Rucode announced some stuff, on and on. The reason I'm mentioning this is it's getting to a point where it's really, really hard to keep up. I wake up every day in the morning and essentially goes, all right, well, I'm already behind on quite a few things. And then by the time the day ends, it feels like, all right, I'm catching up. And next day, basically, it rinse and repeat. You're already behind. So what that does, one, it creates a FOMO. And I've learned this slang from my Gen Z friends, but for folks that don't know what FOMO is, it's a fear of missing out. The idea being, because things are moving so fast, how do we know that we can stay relevant with the skills that we currently have, or what sort of skills do we create so that we can stay ahead of it? And that's a lot of what we want to talk about today. So let's start to get into code. Before we get into actual coding, I do want to talk about this anatomy of coding assistants, something that is extremely common across different tools that are out there, and the way they work. So the reason it starts to matter is a lot of the work when you're working with AI assistant, a lot of the work that you start to think about is how do you orchestrate your agents, and when do you invoke them, and when do you allow them to do the work versus not. So it is important to understand how they are built, or what's at least opened to a general audience like us from the large LLM providers, and how do we use that to our best advantage. Right. So yesterday we were more like in a line completion mode, yesterday being, I'd say, a few years ago. Today, code can get to a point, or coding assistants can get to a point where they understand the full code base. And tomorrow, I think we are getting to a point where these agents will be able to run on their own. And our job starts to become verification, evaluation, make sure that they are right, and course correcting them when they inevitably go off track. One of the concept in that is what's called context window, essentially how much LLM can keep in their mind when we are running a session. Right now, for Claude Code, it's about 200K tokens, 200,000 tokens, roughly about 500 pages worth of tokens, call it about a book worth of data. So the important part has always been, how do you keep that context relevant for a task that you are doing? And once you're done with that task, how do you reset the context, and what do you do with it? So let's talk about what this coding assistant generally expose and how they are built. Generally, there are core components that are common across all of this coding assistant. There are system instructions, MCP, rules, commands, context, things like that, that all of them open up, and it's up to us to decide how we do it. Then they also create something called agent layer. This is where you would have like one agent, a primary way for us as a human or users to talk to those systems. And then they can create sub agents behind the scene. They could like call different tools and whatnot. And then for them to actually stay on track, there is generally some sort of a storage layer. Either it happens where you have installed this, or it happens where you would store the data so they could reference that when they're doing some tasks. These three things in combination generally creates like a mini ecosystem that we end up playing in when we are doing some coding. So what does that look like across multiple systems? I do want to go through this, and then we'll start flip-flopping between code and some of this deck or some of the slides as they become more relevant. But the first one that I want to start with is what's called system instructions. These are the instructions that generally gets ingested when you start a new session with any sort of the right word would be session with this assistant. And they would use that, and after a while it starts to go away, which is why generally it's a good idea to start new sessions. Claude has a file, or Claude code. If I say Claude, generally just understand that it's a Claude code in this context. It's a Claude MD file and then .claude folder. Cursor, that is an IDE out there, has .cursor as a folder. They set different rules, and then you would have cursor rules.md or MDC file. Copilot has .github folder, and then Copilot instructions file. Windsurf, which I don't even know who uses it anymore after all the drama that happened, but Windsurf rules, and then other equivalent providers have something similar. One thing that is starting to become pretty common now, specifically if you're working across multiple providers, is to use a file called agentsmd. Now, this is not an officially supported thing, but most of these providers generally support them pretty well. So we'll look at that as well. Think of agents.md as something that you would use across multiple assistant, but then relevant file like Claude MDs you would use when you're using Claude Code.
Okay.
Okay. Um, let's get into code. Before I jump on or before I start talking into code and whatnot, are there any questions I could answer? Anything that people want to discuss before we go deep? Of audience as always. All right. Let's get into code. So what I want to do actually, so I have created this repo called Cloud Code Files. It was done yesterday, as you can tell, some commits, but like a lot of that happened yesterday. The reason I did that is I wanted to create like an opinionated stack that works in a certain way, specifically because having gone through multiple software development lifecycle processes across products and projects and whatnot, it has been pretty eye-opening that there are patterns that remain same regardless of a stack that you use. If you're TypeScript, developers, if you're using data or like a data expert, be it a data analyst, scientist, engineer, whatnot, you are a developer, call it full stack, backend, front end, mobile developer, does not matter. Your stack may have certain things that it cares about, like Python has virtual environments that it would want to create, but TypeScript doesn't have that concept. You go into .NET and .NET doesn't have that concept, but it would create bin folder for anything that you would build and stuff like that, right? Node would create node modules. Python would create, I think, PyCache and some like other files and whatnot under venv under lib, with the idea being all of them follow certain patterns. So I have been like getting to this point of like, if we stay opinionated, or do we let Claude do all of it that it should be doing? And the more and more we work in this ecosystem, the more and more I've been feeling like it's better to be able to be opinionated and follow certain tools and practices, so we know that the results are going to be more reliable. So what I'll do is I will create a new repo for now, and then I'll show you what it looks like to just get started with Claude without doing anything. The idea is that we will be creating a social media post generator. Bo and I were chatting earlier in the week, is like, how do we show this work in action? We didn't want to go too big where we couldn't finish stuff in 2 hours, but we didn't also want to go too small where we are just showing the code and not actually showing the outcomes of it. So um, I'm in particular really bad at social media. So we thought of we thought of like, why not just put something together where I could ask for a particular topic. It would do, AI would do the research and generate some posts for me. Would I actually post that on social media or not? That's a me problem, but can system do it was the thing that we are trying to figure out. And in last 3 days between Bo and I, we have generated 4 different iterations of it. So we'll show you what that looks like in a second. So let me do this. I'm assuming everyone's familiar with GitHub. If you're not, let me know. I'm happy to like take some time there. But assuming you are, I'm going to start with something completely blank for now. And we'll like start running Claude Code in there and see how things work. All right, so let's just call this I've also been using this word since yesterday a lot, called YOLO mode. And I'll show you what it means in a second. But this is something that we are building, so I could show everything from scratch, and then we'll show you how it looks like when you have done some pre-work. All right, I'll keep this public if anyone wants to like follow along, if you have Claude Code installed. If you do not, that's fine too. But if you do wanted to like work along in this repo, you're welcome to. Just don't put anything malicious. I'm probably going to remove this repo after this workshop anyway. All right, so it's here. Let's go ahead and Open that in GitHub Desktop. And open that in VS Code. Okay, so I'm more of a Claude Code, for what it's worth, is more of a terminal approach. There is a UI that you could install. So if you go, if you're using VS Code, if you go into extensions, you could install Claude Code for VS Code, which is from Anthropic, something I'm pretty particular about making sure that it's coming from official sources. It creates the button up here. If you click on that button, you would see that it essentially opens up a chatbot type of an interface. Personally, I do not like to use this as much. I generally go into terminal. Not that I'm a terminal person, it's just the experience has been better with Claude Code that way. If you were using Copilot, which I do from time to time as well, especially when Claude Code is acting up, you could go up top, and now all of a sudden it works in a GitHub Copilot mode. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the process of installing Claude Code. The process itself is extremely simple. And if you have not done it, you could just simply do some quick start on Claude. This is basically a simple command called npm install. And at a global level, you would install Claude Code. You do have to have Node installed for it, like it mentions. Do install it if you don't have it, but I'm assuming you already have that. Okay, so this is a completely blank repo right now. Normally, what I would want to be able to do is figure out what I'm building in the first place, right? Do some planning. We'll see like two different approaches to plan. One is simply, well, I want to get going. Second is I want to create specifications. Let's create those specifications. So I could show that in action, and we can go from there. Now, if I were to start Claude, there are multiple options. I could just simply do Claude, and it would open up Claude in this particular instance. This is the repo. I could ask some questions. Generally, it would ask you to sign in if you have not signed in. I've been using this nonstop and I am signed in, so it's not going to ask me for some of that. All I did right now is like, hi, and it just gave me an answer, right? Similar to what you would do with any sort of Claude codes, any sort of coding assistance in general. What I do want to show though, also, is this readable for everyone? Should I make screen a little bit bigger? Thanks, Ashay. Perfect. So there are a few commands that you could use. Some of the commands that are, I think, worth calling out are how do you debug some of these things? MCP debug, when we get into MCP, I'll mention that. And then what sort of tools are allowed? Tools is something that a large language model can call. It could be, a simple function like a date function, or it could be calling an external API of any kind. What do you want Claude Code to not do? These are disallowed tools. One of the things that Jason posted in the chat is RMRF. That's basically remove everything that's in there. We do not want Claude Code to do that. So those are the types you could generally say we're not going to allow you to like make a change to an environment file, which is generally a good practice. Fork session is a good one that I use from time to time. I'll talk about what session is, but that's a pretty good one. Model is which one do you want to use? Some settings, and then some additional commands that you could use. I'll show you what MCP command look like in a bit, or at the end, but rest of the command generally are not that frequently used. Okay, so let's start Claude again. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about is this thing called thinking on, and it says tab to toggle. If I press tab, the thinking is off. Normally, I like to keep thinking on. This is the one where it would go through the reasoning process and provide better answers. There is also shift tab. When I do shift tab, you see this thing that showed up called accept edits on, plan mode, or some more shortcuts. I like to start anything that I do in a plan mode. Plan mode is it won't make any changes anywhere. It would just talk to me as if we were trying to make something work. So let's say I want to create a social media post generator using TypeScript stack. How do I, if I asked a simple question, it would do some work and figure out um, how, what that means and what should we be doing. You can see some tokens being used and whatnot. After a while, it will give me some answers. The part that is important here is because we are starting with almost no instructions to Claude, it has no idea on what we are trying to do in the first place, right? So this is no different than me going to Claude UI and asking the same question, and probably the answers would look pretty similar. Options to clarify your requirements was unexpected answers like what do you want to build, why do you want to build it, how do you want to build it, stuff like that, which is a good thing. We want it that way, right? The other option, which I could show in a second, is when we do something like this, what happens if we were to start with an um, existing setup of some sort of instructions. Those are the instructions that that we put together yesterday. So I could show that while it's doing some work. So let me just tell it what we want to be able to do and how it should go about doing it. I'm going to press Shift Tab. Would this response change if it was in not in plan? Yes, it may. Now, the difference between plan mode and other modes, like except edits on, is plan mode only provides responses here. It never makes a change into the existing files that you have. Right. So you are essentially talking to a system and saying, let's just talk it out. That's essentially a plan mode. When you do accept edits on, it can go ahead and create files, edit files, delete files. It will be able to do all of that. Plan mode is just a good practice because behind the scene, plan mode has additional system prompt that Claude team has put in place where it knows like what sort of processes to follow and stuff like that. Great. So let me just do some stuff here. I shift tab to do accept edits on. In this case, let me just say, let's use Next.js. Type today. Tailwind, this is the CSS framework. And then White as my server. Prisma as ORM. And let's not worry about deploy right now. Okay, so it will go ahead and start thinking about, okay, what does it take to do that? And when the responses come back, it will ask for some questions and whatnot. Now, normally, as part of the practice, what I like to do, and this is more of a how I do it thing versus a best practice. It's probably a best practice for me. There are 500 best practices out there, so pick the one that works for you. Generally, anytime I start something new, I like to create 2 folders. Actually, I'll create some more, which I prefer as well. Okay, these are the folders I create. The reason I create these folders is I want to do certain things with these folders, so I know how I can interact with my Claude Code as an agent. Docs is the folder where I would like create all sorts of docs that I could reference back. Scratchpad are the stuff that are like more primary thing that I want to be able to reference along the way. This could be screenshots, diagrams, text files, stuff like that. That's more like I'm working with you, but may not have a meaning beyond my particular session. Scripts is there mainly because inevitably you would run into a thing where Claude would want to create scripts. And I normally try to force it to do all of that stuff in scripts folder versus everywhere in the folder structure to not pollute the particular setup that I like. And then temp is because as part of the testing that Claude does when it builds the code, it will still write like some testing code that is, again, just to be able to debug something. And I do not want that to be able to pollute my existing test and whatnot. So I generally ask it to put all of that stuff in temp and then not put that on version control whatsoever. Again, this is my practice. You're welcome to follow it or not follow it. Okay. So I have created those folder. I think the first thing that I'm going to say is let's create plan in at docs folder in Markdown. The reason I do that is just so that we could go back to it and like make changes and ask it to make changes versus having it in the session and never making it up as a storage. So going back to the deck while it's doing that, we were talking about how there are different components, right? There is core component, agent layer, and storage layer. Right now, we are more in this mode of core components where we need to set up some system instructions, some rules, some commands, and some context, and we'll show you what that looks like before we get into the additional stuff. I am using this storage layer, specifically the doc that I asked it to create, so I can reference back to it. Okay, so what it did is it said it would go ahead and create some sort of like framework information, some core features, the structure, phases, and then here's what it's planning on doing. And now it's asking me, how would you like to proceed? Three options: auto accept edits, manually approve edits, or no clip planning. Do not be afraid to just say no keep planning. I do that probably 50% of the time. I generally actually only pick two options: no keep planning or auto accept. Generally, I don't do manually approve edits, mainly because I'm lazy, not because it's a bad option. Okay, so let's do auto accept edits for now. And what it will do, it will start to look at things and it will start to create some documents and whatnot. Let me pause here while it's doing that. Are there any other questions, or does it make sense what we are doing so far and why we are doing it? If there are questions, please ask while it's doing its thing. If not, then I can keep moving.
I do have a question, Nick.
Yep.
So I have primarily used the Copilot that we have on the right side. I don't know. I wouldn't have explored the VSC as much as you would have, but the way I understand is you used Cloud Code as a provider, and you use that as an extension instead of any other provider, AI provider we could have used within VSC. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I'm choosing to use Claude Code. I could also be using Copilot here. So if I go here, it's Copilot, and I think that's probably what you have been using. If I go and click on left-hand side, you'd see I also have Rue code up here. If I click on OpenAI, I also have Codex here. So I have like pretty much everything in the world that
Right.
not signed in on this machine. But out of all of this, my primary go-to has been Claude Code. It does the best work so far. Also, this is more expensive than everything else that's out there. But I'm on Claude Max 20x plan, which is $200 a month. But you could go with $20, $100 plan. Copilot itself, I believe, has some free and then $5 or $4 or $10 options.
Okay, and how does it differ when we are using the terminal way? Because this approach I haven't used. I've used the right side approach where I've always used the agent mode, prompted. It will suggest you to accept, and I will make smart accepts. That's it. But I've never used terminals. How does it differ?
The difference part more so is how Claude Code is different than an actual terminal thing. You could do Copilot stuff in terminal too, for what it's worth. In this case, with Copilot in particular, you have an ability to pick different models that you can't out of the box with Claude Code. There are ways to like work around it, but I don't know, from terms and conditions perspective, it's a good idea to do that. So if you prefer like multi-model, you would go here. the reason I like Claude, and again, right, I don't have to use terminal. It's just something that's been a good experience. It all Claude Code also has a UI like this, like Copilot. The part that where it starts to differ pretty quick is when we get into advanced mode, sub agents, when you get into hooks and things like that, which we'll talk about in a bit. That's when I think Claude Code gets much better than Copilot does so far. Copilot has some of those options too, just not as relevant or easy to use, and just have not stuck for me. So like you could go configure tools. There are like certain tools that I have set up, or some of them are out of the box. I have set up like one MCP server here that works with Copilot. Um, and then you could either go like agent task edit mode, right? Claude Code by default, what we are doing here is an agent mode right now. The plan mode is similar to ask mode. And then edit mode is what we are sort of running right now by giving it some permissions along the way.
Right. And what we are doing from the terminal approach is basically using instead of using UI, we're just, or graphical interface, we are just using this.
Yes, pretty much. Yep.
It's to prompt the same thing that we would have otherwise.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. The other thing, and I'll show you why I prefer terminal, mainly because I could put some flags that UI does not let me do that. And I'll do that as soon as this thing's done doing all the fun stuff that it started doing that I didn't ask it to do, which is also a thing that any of the assistants that are out there do. Okay, so while it's doing that, one of the things that I want to show you, while Asha and I were chatting, you probably noticed that I was like accepting and saying like, just don't ask me again and keep doing that. Any of those commands that I said auto accept goes into a file under settings.local.json. That's a Claude folder created on its own. And then you see that it went into permissions and allow. And these are the permissions that I said I'm providing as a Claude code that it can do moving forward. I could deny some, I could ask some, just FYI that it did that. Okay, so I'll let it run. Let me actually open up a new instance of Claude Code, and I'll talk about why I prefer terminal. This is something I have not found. There is a way to do that from UI. It just feels too cumbersome for me. So in the beginning, I showed this Claude dash dash help, and one of the it's hard to read, huh? One of the permission up here is called dangerously skip permissions. Now, this is what I call YOLO mode. Also, I think Simon Willison, he's a great guy, very prominent personality in the world of AI, also calls it YOLO mode. So what dangerously skip permission flag does is it will essentially do everything without asking you anything. So you got to be really careful when you use this. If I'm working in a production code base, I still might use it, but and use GitHub as my fallback, but I would not let it commit anything. But if I'm running any sort of like idea that I want to build, generally I go into this dangerously skip permission flag by default. So let's see what that looks like now. Okay, so it's basically Claude and then put the flag. Putting this flag means I'm giving it way more permission than it would have otherwise. You would see this thing called bypass permissions on. If I do shift tab, it will basically go away from it. But this is literally, it could delete your code base. It could delete your databases. It could like make calls that you would not expect. So be really careful with it. Since we are working in a sort of a sandbox, I'm okay with it, just so that we could keep moving faster. But just FYI that it does exist. All right, let's see if this portion's done. It's still going. Let me just pause that for a second. What it was doing is it was creating the full app for me as we were talking. I don't think we have enough time for it to build the full app. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to discard all the changes. Just get back to Okay, so now we have certain things that are here. I discarded all the changes. You would see all the folders are basically empty at this point, which is expected. So now let me do this. Actually, I have an idea. I want to show something that would be a good start. So let me go ahead and should delete this, but I'll worry about it later. Let me just go ahead and create a new repo. And this time, I'm going to choose a template called Claude Code Files. This is a template that I created yesterday. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to show you something that is going to be helpful as we continue to build through it. And I can share through this thing with you as well. Let me create this repo and then go ahead and copy that as well. While it's doing that, the thing that we did not go into yet is claude.md file. So I want to show what that files look like and how do we create those files and things like that when we use the template. What it is essentially is it's a very opinionated list of documentation on the stack that we are choosing. And then based on that stack, what can we do and how can we build the code base and stuff like that. Okay, so before we get started, I think one of the things that I do want to talk about is what's here. There are some folders, some agents already created. We'll talk about what they are. There are some commands that has already been pre-created, some hooks that's been pre-created, some documents that has been pre-created, including the Claude MD file themselves. So if we were to talk about what this is, and before we go and do all of that, let me go ahead and actually start some work on it. So I will start some work and let it do stuff in the background while we talk about how does all of this thing work. All right. Now I have opened up terminal like in MacBook versus with the integrated terminal within VS Code. The reason I'm doing that is there are some memory issues that we run into. And there are times where I would ask Claude Code to spawn like 5, 7, 9 agents, and it does so much work and runs out of memory so quick that it crashes Visual Studio Code itself. That normally does not happen in the terminal mode. So if I know I'm gonna really go hit it hard, normally I prefer to do it in a actual terminal versus integrated terminal. Okay, so time to start Claude. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask it to generate that social media app. Let me create one prompt and then let it do all the work. So I have created all sorts of guides on how I want it to work. Guides basically include API decisions and design patterns, how I want APIs to be designed, the architecture that I want, authentication structure that I want, how features get built, how testing gets done, how UI gets built, all of it. This is probably about 15,000 lines of work across all of those documents, and then some more up here. The point being, you take time specifically if you're starting a new project to identify how you want something to work, because you could continue to reference it over and over. And then at the end, I have created Claude MD file, which basically incorporates all of that, such as I'll talk about what constitution is in a second. It's a thing that that is part of spec-driven development. But like, what are those principles? There are 7 principles that I like to follow. One of them is domain purity. How does the auth work? API first, mobile first, clean architecture, security by default, yada yada yada. So I'll talk through that in a second. But let me actually start the work so Claude can do its thing and we do our own thing. The documents and guides, .md file, then use spec-driven development using SpecKit to build me a social media. App will ask user for a topic and do a web search for that topic. Then it should create a post for LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. The user should be able to see the reasoning, AI, and links that used to come up. Okay, so this is not necessarily by any means a good spec. This is me just basically doing a brain dump on what I want to build. But you would see that it actually now just goes on and starts doing a bunch of stuff. So for now, let me just run it. As you see, I'm in this bypass permissions mode on, which means for most part, it will not ask me questions when it needs to generate files, do some work, do some tasting, any of that. It will just simply go ahead and do it itself. So while it's doing that, now let's get into the details of what all of those things are and the reason it matters. So there are 2 sides to this. There is one piece which is called spec-driven development, and the second side is Claude Code itself. First, let's talk about spec-driven development. There are quite a few tools out there. There are 2 that are very prominent, specifically in the world of Claude Code. And in the world of outside of Claude Code, SpecKit is probably the leading SDD, spec-driven development tool. It recently was launched probably like month at most, got about like 34,000 stars, and it's just growing pretty quick. I'm not sure how people actually care about license, but in the world of enterprise, you would. It's MIT license, which means that you could do anything you want with that code base. It's your responsibility, and there are no restrictions on use of code base for commercial or personal reasons whatsoever. So if you see an MIT license, have it. If you see Apache 2.0 license, that's also have it, but with some careful consideration on what sort of enterprise support you would need if you're in a company. Because we are just doing this as a demo, I do want to talk about how SpecKit work. There is this process that they follow, which is you create a constitution. Constitution is the principles on which you want to build your application. Then you create a spec, what you want to build. Then you plan. Then you create tasks out of those plan, and then you basically implement tasks. This is a standard process for anything that is considered spec-driven, and these are different commands that you could use. SpecKit in particular is available for pretty much every different agent that is out there. If you go here, you can see it's Claude, Copilot, Gemini, Cursor, on and on and on. All to say, the reason I'm picking this over some of the others that are out there is if you're not a Claude Code person, at least you have something that you could use regardless of what type of code assistant you're using. So let's see what some of that could look like. I'm going to go a little bit beyond the world of commands, and I want to quickly get into spec-driven development part. Generally, the way it works is you are the one deciding and architecting, and there is generator, review, and tester. So we'll talk about what that looks like. High level for now. Let's get back into using that and what that looks like. The installation itself is pretty straightforward. I have already installed it, but you're welcome to go ahead and check out this repo on what the installation process look like. It's, I think, single command, UV tool install. UV is a package installer for Python, so make sure you have Python installed. Let's see that in action. The way you can figure out if it's already there is if you do specify, you would see that it runs this command, and I know it's already there. The second thing you could do is you could do specify help to see different commands that I was talking about. Normally, you would start with specify.init, and with that, it will walk you through the process to set up specify or spec kit. And it says it's not empty. Do you want to continue? I could say yes, yada yada yada, and it will say like which coding assistant do you want to use. If I say Claude Code, it would essentially go ahead and create some commands which looks like this. The work's already done here, so I'm not going to go through the process, but you're welcome to. Okay, so back to using Claude again. One of the things that is pretty common in the coding assistant world is commands. Commands are what's called slash commands. Slash command, some are available out of the box. Some you could create your own. I have created some of my own and some that are available from the tools that I've used. So you can see like there are different commands that are available to me. The one that I want to particularly show is the constitution portion. So what that constitution look like, and then I have some commands that I have created that we could show as well. You could see what that looks like because under Claude folder, anything I put under Claude folder and in there under commands folder become a command. It's a markdown file, which basically shows what you want that command to do. So I have this folder called validate, and then validate has all of these commands. One of that is validate constitution. What I did yesterday was to determine how I want to build code, specifically when I'm in this mindset of building an idea that I may have, but I don't want to put so much time. So I came up with this constitution on how do I want certain things to structure. That constitution, there's also a folder or document I created called philosophy, but you're welcome to check it out later. The constitution folder, document itself is basically a guideline that says this is how you do the coding work. For example, domain purity, there is a zero tolerance for violation for this particular article. The idea being any work that you do at the domain layer, for people that don't know, this is domain-driven design. Domain layer is a sacred layer that does not have any sort of database connections, APIs, or anything. And I'm essentially enforcing that. So it's a heart of application, must remain pure, stack agnostic, and free from any infrastructure concerns. Here's why. Here's what it means you should do. And here's what it means you cannot do. Once you do that, here's the gates that you need to check for. And if you do have any sort of violations, this is what you need to do. In a sense, I'm setting up a guardrail so that LLM knows what to expect and how to act on certain things. Let's quickly go up here and you would see what I mean by that. In here, what I had said was look at all the documents and then CloudMD file and then go through this process. Because I said use the spec-driven process using spec kit, what it did was it searched everything, read everything, and then it ran some commands that would have been very similar to generating a spec, generating a task, and then basically saying, I can see that everything is ready. What do you want me to do next? Essentially what I did yesterday just for fun was to automate that spec-driven process for me because I'm lazy in a way. But at the same time, I generally try to be very particular about the work that gets done for it. So it did all of the work, there is some work that is already done here. And I'll show you what that looks like. But if I were to go in and say continue implementation, it would go ahead and start coding for me. Let's actually see that in action ourselves in this particular code base. Let's say I want to specify. So spec kit specify probably is the command. Okay. Now what you would see is because I in particular use this command, let's actually look at what that command looked like. If I go to the command, it basically says that it creates initial feature description. For this description, this is how the work gets done. Gather feature description, ask for what problem it solves, who will use it. Some examples are like this: ask clarifying questions when needed, create the scope, user, value, priority, and the examples of it, and then create the spec directory, create spec MD file, create all the user stories, create the feature scope, yada, yada, yada. It could be anything you want, like literally anything you want. The reason I'm walking you through this is at some point, if you're doing this for yourself, you may have your own process and you may want to follow that. The idea being you could create that as your own command and use that as your own command that makes sense for you. We'll create some commands for ourselves in a bit as well. When I asked the question, you saw that it basically asked me questions that are similar to what was written in that command. I'm lazy for now. For what it's worth, don't do this if you're actually building it for production. This is demo, so I'm letting it be making assumptions so I can stay focused on showing what are the options. What you would see though is it is going to create a spec document here that we could continue to rely on. While it's doing that, because we will run out of time, I have already done that as a process yesterday. So let me show you what they looked like, and the application's already built, but at least this way you know how we got to it, right? So there are different specs that I created. All of them were created yesterday. The first spec is I want to create image generation for post. When I go look at the spec, actually, this is the first spec from yesterday. If I look at the spec, you would see that the ask that I had was this: build an LLM AI-powered social media generator that creates content optimized for that particular social media. From there on, it created user stories. If you have been in a professional world, it's pretty common for product team to create user stories, or your teams to create user stories in general. It created the workflow. How do we want the user to actually go through this process, the problem it solves, and then on and on and on, right? Like there are multiple workflows, there are different spec to it, what we are not going to do, what we expect delivered, some technical documentation that needs to be generated as part of the work, and how do we know that we have achieved this spec as a whole. Going back to that storage layer, this acts as a storage layer for Claude to know that it is actually following the tasks that were asked of it. So when I go look at subspec, you would see that it created a spec for API, because in this particular case, I want to generate an API. And it created that spec based on all the guides that I had set up. So it knows that I'm using TypeScript as my language, Next.js as my framework, Prisma as my ORM, on and on. So it created, like, if there are any sort of error responses, this is what it should look like. This is what my API endpoint should look like. This is what I expect to go in. This is what I expect to go out. Here's how the validation happens, so on and so forth. You do not need to know all of this, but one thing is clear. If you did understand the fundamentals, you would know when these things go wrong. if you did not know any fundamentals, it would still work. So don't be afraid to just jump in and let it do the work. But please do know that if anything, you should learn the fundamentals and how those fundamentals get applied. Same thing goes into database schema. With database schema, what should be the schema of it? How do we know we run the migration? How do we create the database? The technical plan for it, and then different type of test that I wanted to create. In my guides, I'm very particular about where I want tests to go. At the domain layer, I'm very strict about those tests because this is the one, if I mess up here, everything else does not work out. And then I start to get towards UI component, I become a little bit more lenient. How those tests should be generated, where those tests should go, all of that is coming from the guides that I have created. So when the spec get created for me, they follow the guides that I had already set up in the first place. From there, it creates a list of tasks. The first task is we need to generate a domain layer, and it follows TDD. In this particular one, I prefer to follow TDD. TDD is test-driven development, where you write the test, see the test fail, then you write the logic, and then you see the test pass. And then it basically goes through that process on and on and on. The first one was domain layer, second was what, data schema, infrastructure layer, application layer, API layer, and then at the end UI layer. I ran this yesterday. Like I said, it basically went on for about an hour and a half and built the whole thing on its own. I'll show you what that looks like. It was, for what it's worth, pretty impressive. But just know that it essentially did the work, and I didn't have to do much, mainly because I did all the work in the beginning on how this development should be done. Let me pause here for a second, because this is probably a new concept for many. Are there any questions I could answer on spec-driven development? Is that something you want to see live? I'm happy to take the time to do it live, but I want to be mindful of time and focus on other topics too. Any questions?
Yeah, hi Nick, I'm Shweta.
Shweta?
So yeah, like you shown that earlier, like there are like a docs under docs, like you have specified how your test should be, and then how your like I think not in this one, like the repo which is like live, so which is like
Yes, it's the same
yeah,
doc from the same template. Yep. So yeah, these are those guides that I've created. One of them is
yeah,
testing
this one.
guides. Yep.
Yeah, so using this, it will create all the specifications, right? When you run the command.
Yes and no. So yes, it will use this as a guidance. The specification itself gets created based on a command. A command takes a priority because in that particular command, so let me actually go to that command. In the specify command, there is like a particular flow that I'm asking it to follow. And that is a workflow that is different than the guideline, right? Those two things are different concept in a way. However, when I start the session, at start of the session, this Claude MD file gets injected. And as part of that process, it basically learns about everything that I have said. And it goes into the context of that particular work. So yes, it will know about it and it will follow that. So the first thing that gets is Claude MD file, which has all the information about all the guides that I have put together. So now it has the context about those guides. Then it goes into specification, and then specification plus guides make up the spec.
Okay, got it. But we have to take like time how our architecture should be, like we have to specify
Yes.
clearly in the initial part itself. So that's how it will know like what we're gonna build, and then how to like how to follow like I mean, before generating any code, and then it's more of like how do you think like it's gonna help? Like we have all the specification documents. Afterwards, it's created. So as you said, like we have like a task, we have tests, how it should test, and also it even created the documents like user stories and all these things. So we're gonna use this while developing the real product. Is that
Yes.
okay?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So there are two different concerns here, right? One is from a coding perspective, how the coding should be done.
Yeah.
So pretty much every single guide that has been put together is all around how the coding should be done, right? Like what should your code look like? How do you do authentication? How do you architect? How do you design your API? How do you design your database? How do you do the debugging and development? This is what the guides are about.
Yeah.
Spec is the product concern, which is what the product or a feature should be doing, right? And that is going to be dynamic. In fact, the domain model itself will be dynamic as well. So in here, we talk about the principles, we talk about the best practices, we talk about the guides, but we do not determine what we are building, right? We have no idea what the user will end up building because it's a template after all.
Yeah.
Spec is when we know what the user wants to build. So that's where we essentially apply these guidelines to build the code.
Got it. So you talk about the guardrails, right?
Mhm.
So once the specs are generated, like how we are ensuring that in the specifications itself, are there any like, okay, this is how these are the things that you have to check before, like, the guardrails.
Yes.
Where exactly we add those?
So a lot of that goes in the spec itself, but it
Okay.
also goes into when you build your technical plan, which will happen as part of the spec driven development. There are, let me go all the way. There are like success metrics that gets put in here that generally we would hope that gets followed, not it happens every time. So what I have done on top of that is I have created some hooks and some validators. You're seeing these are like shell scripts. And I run some of those shell scripts to make sure that it actually follows that. One of the script and I think one of the agent that I had created is a taste runner and taste writer. And I'll talk about agents. I'm jumping a little bit forward, but once the work is done, it basically invokes some of these agents and it runs the scripts where we would know exactly how this would work. In a way, the scripts are no different than me going in and, for example, if I were to go and run yarn.test, which would essentially run all the tests. Well, this one doesn't have any test, but it's here. So it would basically be able to run all the tests that's been written as part of the process. So as a developer, what we normally do is we would write the code and then we would test the code. Well, hopefully,
Yeah.
but that's a good practice at least. So in this case, what it would do is it would actually test all of the code along the way. And because I have created this hooks, it would force it to run the test. And if the test fail, it will not let it move forward. It's one of the gate that I have put as part of my guardrails on the setup that I have done.
Okay. So this will be while running the code, and then you
Yes.
make sure that those shell scripts will run, and then okay.
Yep.
And, and also you talk about this one like, okay, so when we actually build something for the production, so you said, oh, I always make sure that like in the Git, like you push it to the Git, and then before it will go to the production, you approve it, and then so um is it like you're saying, so once we test it, like it's once the feature is developed, everything is done, so while it is testing, so it won't even push it to the GitHub, like once we add the guardrails, or like it will stop, like how this works? You.
That's for you as a developer, not you as in you, but like that's for the developer to decide. In my
Mm,
case, what I prefer is it commits.
mm,
Sometimes I let it actually commit to remote, which is at GitHub itself as
yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But I would never let anything get merged till I have reviewed it myself from a PR perspective.
Mm,
That's my flow. I think Bo is more stricter than I am. Bo generally just does not want anything to go, even do a Git commit, and he has his own scripts for that particular piece, where he would essentially run those things to say, "I want to know when you're gonna commit." So I'm more lenient that way. It was not. All to say, this is like for developer or a team to decide
mm,
on how they would want to set up those flows.
got it. Yeah.
Were you
um
gonna say something?
Iron Fist.
That yes. Um, Okay. So speaking of that, the thing that I think everyone probably I'm hoping can walk away from, at least on this part, is take your time before you start a new feature or a new product. Take your time to actually think through some of these things. This whole idea of constitution is from SpecKit itself. The thought that I was initially going after was philosophy, which is here's the philosophy we want to follow. Who are we building this for? Why are we building? What sort of core values do we care about? There are some core values that I care about in certain type of products and some in other type of products. So for example, this particular template was built for web applications that uses AI and LLMs as like a first class citizen. That's what this was particularly built for. When we do this, some of the things that we care about is in terms of speed, because I'm building an MVP, I care about speed. I care about quality, but not to a point where it hinders my progress. I care about smart defaults where we know we are using like, proven practices. There is like some non-negotiable that I absolutely want to enforce, on and on and on, right? Like there are things like that matters. All to say, take your time as a team, as a developer. If you're doing this just by yourself, which for me happens a lot of times, I essentially end up spending about half a day or sometimes even more just to come up with this type of things. The reason it starts to matter is because from there on, when my code gets generated, so in this case, I'm following domain-driven design, my code that got generated from it always has a particular setup that I can rely on. So in this case, I know anything that that was particularly important for my domain and business world got into entities. The entities will always stay here, and all sorts of value or objects, which are like the things that become data that ends up going into database at some point or gets used as the business logic, would always be in a domain. It will not go beyond that. And I have tried to break it multiple times just to see if I could mess it up. But because of the guidelines that has been put in place, it's been actually following it pretty well. The other thing that became pretty important is how the tests get written. So everything that was done for domain, the tests did get written, and they do get followed. And because I'm using shell scripts for it versus an LLM, I know when the test fail, I could go and do something about it. And there are certain things that it's not allowed to do with forbidden, which it's LLM, so take it with a grain of salt, but for most part, it follows. All to say, when the code gets written, it's not just, oh, I'm hoping it's going to work. From a professional perspective, if I wanted to put this on internet, I'm confident enough that things are not so messed up that I'm going by hope anymore. There is some method to madness in a way. All right. Thanks for question. Asha, I saw you had unmuted for a second. Did you have a question, or anyone else for that matter?
I did, but I am just keeping time in mind. So if you have a lot to go through, then we can discuss that later. But most of your question definitely helped me.
Sounds good. All right. Let me keep moving for a second, and then I'll try to go through some more concepts while this thing's being built in itself in the background. Yeah. So in here, now what you're starting to see is all the guides that I had put in place, right, are basically being followed. So even when I'm starting a new project, all the objects basically follow the similar setup. It's being built completely without it knowing about anything else. But I know there are value objects, there are aggregates. These are, again, concepts that are more on the software development side, but worth learning, regardless of what your expertise is in the technology world. And then the constitutional priorities gets mentioned. So domain purity is important. You must not put any React or Next.js or Prisma objects in domain because I want it stack agnostic. This will get enforced because those were the guides that were set up upfront. It gets checked by running some of those agents that there are no dependencies. If there are dependencies, it will fail and fix it. There are some agents that are out there that it knows about. And from there on, what it's doing now is it's basically writing tests. You saw it took about 2 minutes to write a test, about 100K tokens, 50 tool use, whatever. So tests exist and now they fail. Great. Then the test runner comes into picture. It does its thing, and then it fixes those tests and writes the logic and whatnot. And then the task becomes complete. And now we have like X amount of tests that are done, that are passing or failing. Then the validator comes in. Validator would validate all of that. It confirms that we are not using any frameworks. Domain is pure. Things look good. and it's now finally using the shell scripts that I would expect it to use. All to say, in a way, I'm automating a process that I normally go through when I'm developing things. And because I'm able to do that, and because I know that those processes will be followed, it's more reliable than it would have been otherwise. But if I'm just simply saying, Claude, go do your thing. In many cases, this is where I think the difference between vibe engineering and AI augmented or AI assisted engineering comes into picture. With vibe engineering, you are essentially letting Claude Code, Copilot, whoever take the reign and say build and hope it works. With AI assisted coding, you are staying in control. You are forcing and providing guide rails to be able to follow the processes. So when the code comes out, you know it's reliable. All right, I'll let it do its thing. Let's go through some more stuff. We'll talk about MCP in a bit. Actually, Bo, do you have all the MCP stuff open? If so, we could go through it now.
Sorry. Yeah, I can show you an example. I'm actually trying to build another one that is not working, but
okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Why don't you pull it up? Let me actually talk about MCP for a second, and then you could show that, and then I can take over again.
Yeah. Give me
okay.
one. Let's start talking.
While he does that, let's talk about MCP for a second. MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. Think of it as a gateway for LLM to talk to external systems. The word that gets used is it's a USB-C for LLMs. Idea being, just like in your computer, if you had USB-C, you could like put any sorts of different connectors. It is a similar thing. LLMs themselves has a training freeze that happens. And after that, the knowledge that they had basically is limited. So if you want to provide additional knowledge or access to additional tools, you would use something where you would build what's called functions or tools. But the problem with that is for N type of applications, you would end up building M type of integration. It's not a good idea. It's a maintenance nightmare. It's fragmented. So Anthropic last year came up with this protocol called Model Context Protocol. For what it's worth, there are a few others out there too, but MCP has been gaining momentum. And at this point, pretty much every large provider and company is starting to offer that. It's a way for LLM to talk to a different system. So if you want your API to be accessible by LLM, you would create an MCP, you would register that MCP, and then LLM can decide when to call that. If you want to see what that looks like, there is this command in here that says context. Context command is an important one because it tells you how the context is being used, and you know when it's going to be worth it or not worth it. You see that there is a system prompt, which is about 2.1K tokens. There are system tools, which is about 11,000 tokens. MCP tools that are 1.3K tokens, because I have some MCPs that are available out of the box. Some memory files, which are my guides and stuff like that. And then about 100,000 tokens on my messages, which is the context for the work that it's doing. And then you can see that some of them are Agent OS, which sometimes I like, sometimes don't. And then some MCP tools that can do certain things that it should be or should not be able to do. If you do /MCP, I don't think I have anything here, but you could configure MCP and then you could let it call some of those MCPs out of the box. Let me actually hand it over to Bo for a second while he shows how he has done it. And then I could show you how to set up MCP for Claude. And then you could also do it for others too. But Bo, over to you. Let me stop sharing.
Sure. So I'll start by sharing a project of ours here at UEB. This is actually the code for our marketing site. So if you go to ue.ventures, this is what's running. So Nik was talking through a lot of the spec stuff. I started doing this before that came out. So I did a lot of this manually. And so what that meant was every time I learned a new way of doing things or anytime I built something, I had it document all of that inside of my documentation folder here. And then one of the things I did here is I used a very strict architecture protocol for how I was going to build back end versus front end of this thing for this site. And so every domain inside of our marketing site and it's a CMS. So, blog posts are under posts, and then, different companies that we're working with are under companies. But what you'll see is that it's all structured the same way, and every API actually has the same basic methods. That allows me to to make it really easy to integrate with each of these at either the API level or the business logic layer. They all basically follow the exact same pattern. And so what I realized was one thing I could do to help myself build things faster while I was building this and populate data was to build an MCP server directly into my project. And if you look at it, I built this thing out so that it can actually just access through these tools everything inside of my domains. And so this MCP server can actually create a blog post for me. It can also generate images for me and clear out the backgrounds of those, map those to different assets in my system. This particular project uses Google Storage for assets, and it's a proxy layer on top of that. So now I can actually build all of that inside of Cloud Code, populate that, and push it up so that while I'm testing things out, or even if I really quickly need to build something for production use, or in my test case, I can just do that with Cloud Code. So it was just a productivity thing that I threw together and it turned out to be something really interesting for me. And then, as Nik said, this is all just routed into the. You can see exactly where I put it into my .mcp file. And it is something that Claude can then just manage on its own. And then you just need to map it inside of package. You can see how Claude basically then manages the MCP instances of how it integrates with it. So the result of that is that I can come in here and I can say something like use the MCP integration. What did I call that? MCP. I think it's called UEV MCP CMS. UEV CMS MCP server to create a sample blog post about AI software development or AI assisted software development. Create using the same server. Blog cover image. And of course, we'll see if this actually works. Demo gods being what they are, but let's see what happens. So you can see it's actually using it. It was successful. It was able to build a prompt, generate the image. And I just have an ignored Scratchpad folder for things like this for it to work from. It's uploading it is uploaded it to my asset system. It's going to write the blog. I use TipTap as the blog editor, so it's double checking that now to make sure that it does the right structure, which is great. Rich text. And it's going to finalize that with setting the cover image, and then I'll shift my share screen and show you what it did. Oh, it's apparently going a little crazy with the blog. That's okay too. Okay, looks like it's done. So I'm going to stop sharing here and then share my browser. One moment.
I had a quick question while you were sharing that. Oh,
Sure.
so
What I understand is in this case, you're actually generating an image for the blog post context by AI. But if I were to provide like rightly name images that I captured and then make a blog post out of it, would it be able to do the same thing? Just suggest them that use my images.
Yeah, it would be able to, yeah, you would just have to put the image in a folder that it can see, and then it can do, and at least in my implementation, it would be able to access that. So I used an API called let me just double check what I actually used. I think it's called replicate.ai. One moment, I'll tell you in a minute. Yeah, Replicate API. Replicate is just sort of an aggregator of image and video generation and editing models. And so I was able to basically create an MCP integration directly with that to generate or edit images. And so I can do it that way. Or, like you said, I could just give it an image and it would upload that. I have an entire assets API domain that I built. So then all it has to do is just upload it using the API that I built into that. But here you can see it did pull together a blog. You can see the cover image. And so if I actually go to it, it's in draft, so we'll publish it. And just go to the, so pretty simple example, nothing fancy going on. It's just this kind of thing makes it really easy for me during the development process to build out assets like this to see how it looks. That's what I wanted to do. Back to you, Nick. You're muted.
Thank you. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense on what we were trying to do there. I think the part that's important to think through there is understanding what MCPs make sense for what type of work. In particular, what I want to sort of like get across is MCPs are highly valuable, but they also take an immense amount of your context window. And context window is even more important than just having access to MCP tools. There are times where it's just better to say, hey, do this or do that, versus trying to put all of that in MCP. For example, GitHub MCP takes about like 20,000 tokens. That's like 10% of my context window. I would rather use it for something that I could do better. But then there are like others that doesn't take much. The one that I think Bo was showing was sequential thinking. That MCP basically gives a thinking ability for LLM on top of what's already available out of the box. So given that being the case, you may want to be able to consider how and when to use those MCPs, when to put them in the context or when not to put them in context. Given where we are, probably there are three things that I want to be able to do now. One, I want to show you like how to generate a command for yourself, how to generate a hook for yourself, especially if you're using Claude Code. But the things that we will see remain same in other coding assistants. And then at the end, I do want to show you what the final app that it built looked like, and why I think that is a good app versus not. So let's go through that one by one. Give me 1 sec to share my screen again. Okay, so everyone's able to see the screen now? Yep. Well, I guess I have the second screen open so I can see it. Let's see first what Claude did so far, and then let's try to build our own agents real quick. Okay, so there was a task that initially we had said like, go ahead and start writing some tests and start writing some code. What Claude did since then is it used different agents that I have created, including constitutional validator. It's just a thing that I made up, but it made sense. You see it used quite a few tokens. It like this took 2 minutes, this took 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 more minutes, yada, yada, yada. The tasks that were created as part of the spec process, the first task was to create, domain level entities. It went in and finished all of those tasks one by one. It said what they are, how it was set up. It wrote all the tests for all of them. So like 18 tests here, 25 tests there, whatnot. Then it went in and confirmed that those tests actually pass. It confirmed that we are following our constitution and philosophy. And then at the end, it basically made sure that everything that we were expecting it to do when the things are complete are actually complete. And then it went on to task 2. And then now it can finish task 2. In all of this, I did not do anything, but I know the processes that I would have followed has been followed. This is, I think, the important part that I want to get across. So now, one of the agents that I actually really wish I had is sort of like a user guide, or even better, how do I start my spec process? Right now, as you saw, like when I started the process, my idea was go look at these guides. Once you have looked at the guides, go look at Claude MD, then I want you to be able to do this. Instead, let's say I want to create an agent. First, I'll create a markdown file, and then we can move that into an agent and we could see what that looks like, right? So I'm going to write down, I want to create an agent. Close certain process on how to create a spec. The idea is that it will get all the guides under docs guides. It will then check Claude MD file. It will understand how everything is supposed to be built. Then it will go ahead and execute C5. Code name. Okay. So I asked that before we even start creating spec, I want Claude to always look at the guides that I have. This is not something that existed so far. So it's going to look at some of these things. It's going to look at the guide and it's going to come up with a particular MD file. We'll let it do that. While it does that, what I also want to show you is how to create your hooks. In terms of a hook, there, it's basically a shell script file. Now, I'm not the person who writes shell commands or PowerShell commands for that matter. So generally I use Claude for that too, with the idea of like, this is what I want to be able to use and this is what it means and things like that. And then you would go ahead and put that under hooks. And in your settings file, you would set when to invoke those hooks. In this case, I'm saying once you're done using a particular tool, if you edited or wrote a file, I want you to auto-validate some changes that have been made. And for that, I want you to run XYZ command. One of that command is npx prettier, which just basically makes everything look proper in terms of formatting, and then linting process. If you did writing, I want you to make sure that you regenerate Prisma client if you had updated any of the Prisma files or schema.prisma. So these are the hooks. When to choose hook between a particular command. Command is when it's an instruction. Hook is when you have to programmatically confirm that something is working. There is no LLM involved. It's just literal script. I prefer script when I know it's a reliable process, like test process, grep process, file edit, file write, stuff like that. And if it's something that is more of an instruction to LLM, I use command. Okay, so that's how you would do it. Again, we don't need to necessarily worry about building one right now. But if you did want to go and build one yourself, you could go to Claude Code books and read through some of this documentation. It's actually pretty good, but you're seeing like for this particular event, when a tool gets called and it's a command, I want to execute this command, right? Like, and there is a lot of stuff written up here. If you have more questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to do like a much deeper dive on how the hooks work themselves. And then the commands, the slash commands that we were talking about, those are written up in this particular place. You could create them. Right now, I think the system is building one itself. Based on what we had said. I'm losing track of like where I'm actually running it. So one sec. Yeah, here's where it's actually basically building that that MD file for me. So up here, you see it created a new file called agentspec.md. If I were to go and check that out now, the spec itself, or the file itself, is a context-aware specification creation. This is how we do things. This is what we do. This is where the constitution is. This is where the guides are, yada, yada, yada. This is what you do. And like, there's a bunch of stuff that it created, right? Now, because it is put under commands as an agent spec, it becomes a, exit for a second. I exited just because I need to reload the session. It becomes a command for me, right? So if I were to rerun Claude, now I can see that agent spec is a new command. And if I do that command, it basically agent that learns architecture and creates informed specification, right? For example, let's say I wanted to create a new feature on create an integration with LinkedIn API so I can automatically post my thoughts on LinkedIn. Let's say I wanted to build that integration, right? If I run that command now, what it's going to do is it is going to actually look at all of these things that I had said it must follow, and it will follow that, right? So now when I said I don't want to do this, the first thing it did was it read my constitution. It is reading all of my guides. It's continuing to read all those guides. It's going to go through the process, and it's going to like then invoke that specify command. But now I know it's following my guides. I quickly built this just because as of yesterday, I felt like I needed it. But I'm sure as you start building, you can start to build your own commands as well. That will be good for you or your own teams. So now let's look at what it came back with. It came back with the questions just like the specify command came up when the first time we tried SpecKit, but now with the knowledge of like how we do things, and it now talks about domain entities versus random, what do you want to build? It talks about API design question. Do I use REST or TRPC? It talks about storage. How long do you want it? And then how do you want to do it? In other words, now Claude understands how I do my coding, and then it basically works with me versus me working with Claude. So that was an example of building a command that I could use for myself moving forward. If we could also build certain hooks, like I said, I have already built some of those hooks yesterday. They are just shell scripts. You can ask it to say, hey, when XYZ things happen, I want certain hooks to be executed, create the shell script, and then update my settings JSON. Okay, hopefully that's useful. So let's look at how some of that hierarchy works. Normally, the hierarchy would be enterprise rules that you would set up at the highest level, then your project rules that could go into project settings, then your user rules, and then your like rules that you apply during the session. Some of it depends on the type of operating system, Mac versus Windows and whatnot, but that's generally what it follows. Comments lines we have already talked about. If you are using some other commands, for example, Claude plus cursor plus GitHub, you would essentially end up with .cloud folder, .cursor folder, .github folder, and agents folder, or sorry, agents file and whatnot. One of the other thing that I think is worth talking about, we are coming short on time, but probably this is something worth discussing, is you could ask Claude to invoke multiple sub agents and then execute those agents. We already did that as part of the process. So for example, when it did the work for us here, let me see if I can find that. These are all the sub agents that it basically invoked. Sub agents or agents themselves are nothing but another MD file that goes under agent. So you see there is a test writer, test runner, and test validator. The way I'm setting it up is, hey, your name is this. This is what you're allowed to do. These are the servers, MCPs that you could use if you have access to it. And then once you have that, this is how you would go ahead and like do the work, check your task, make sure that the work is done, check for like certain entities and type of entities, and then confirm all of those things. So in this case, all of those agents basically got invoked one after the other, just like it was my workflow. If you are truly living in your YOLO mode, you could also come in and say, spawn 4 sub agents. Okay, sub should have SUB, but anyway, couldn't type. So what it would do now is it would like pick different to-do list or to-do tasks and then like create multiple agents in parallel and go ahead and do all of that all in parallel. I normally try to stay away from this mainly because if I'm going in a certain flow, I do not want things to be conflicting with each other. It just ends up taking more time than solving for it. But there are times where you could just like run different work trees and have multiple instances, multiple UIs all going in one, same direction. So now you see that like it's spawning 4 agents. So now it basically created agent for compliance, migration, generation, and it will just like go do all the work all in parallel. Like I said, I'm generally wary of this, but sometimes it's one of those times is, you know what, just have it. If it doesn't work, I'll discard and start over. Okay, so that's sub agents. One of the other approach that I'm still tasting on and working through is, can I create these agents that are like code reviewer, taste writer you already saw, that's been working, planner, debugger, and can I have them work together in a certain workflow? You execute this and then this and then this, and that process is what I want to mimic. Once we are able to mimic that, I think it will be able to do probably 3-4 hours of coding, but that's still work in progress for us. How do you build a sub agent? Similarly, we built our command. You just create an MD file with what you want that agent to be able to do, and you put that under agent folder. Some of the hook system, we are not going to go into details. I briefly mentioned, probably worth reading the documentation for it. I think for most part, the thing that I would still want to reiterate is, as a developer, we are becoming more system designers and architects than just coders. Yes, the hard part that no one talks about is now not we only need to know how to code, even though we are not doing it ourselves. But now we also need to know system design fundamentals, architecture fundamentals, and whatnot. If you know that, you generally do become 3x, 5x developer, hopefully at some point 10x developer. If you do not know that, it's basically hoping for the best, and as an engineer, it's just not a good idea. So some of the practices, if you are working across multiple coding assistant, prefer agents MD file. I do prefer this. It's still something I'm experimenting with, but so far the results have been good. Create specialized sub agents and commands like I was showing you, that works much better than not. Set up safety hooks. I can't say this enough. Do make sure that you're not relying everything when it comes on LLM, because LLM by definition are token generators and just predict whatever they want. You want something where you can reliably go after shell scripts that is deterministic. Use MCP for external tool connections, and then start with restrictive permissions and expand gradually. especially if you're working in production code base. Don't do what I did, which is dangerously skip permission. Again, it was sandbox and I wanted to move fast. But in production code base, be really, really mindful about that. There have been enough examples of Claude Code like deleting databases has happened with me as well. And there was an embarrassing moment at one point, but well, you learn some. Do not skip code reviews. Do that. PRs should be approved and should be looked at. That's where you end up spending most of your time in evaluation and quality checks. Be mindful of context limit and token budgets, especially if you're on a lower plans. And then do not mix different concerns in single agent. If you're building agents, have one agent do one thing well, follow Unix methodology there. Never hard code credentials. Everything should be in environment files, and Claude Code should not be able to do anything with environment file. And do not deploy without testing. I'm sure that goes without saying. Some examples that we looked at, some examples we could try. I will skip some of this just because, and I'm happy to share this deck after the fact. But I think once you start following some of these processes, things work out. What I want to show though is while this thing is building itself and like going through the process and whatnot, I did this yesterday. So I want to show you what it built without me actually getting involved pretty much at all. So this is that social media post generator thing it built yesterday. Keep in mind, the only thing that I had to do, I had to intervene once where it was using Tailwind vs CSS version 3 versus version 4. That migration between Tailwind is always a nightmare. So be on the lookout for it if you're using that stack. Except that I did not write any piece of code. I did not actually get involved. It basically at the end came up and said it's ready. I tested it and it worked. Again, my time went into architecting for it, but not actually building it. So let's see what that looks like. One, there is authentication built in. I used Clerk. So I'm actually logged in now. And at some point, I'm happy to open this up too. You could see different posts that are here as history. You're seeing all of it says the same thing just because I'm lazy to type something new. But basically, let me click on one of that to show what it showed. Latest trends in agentic AI. How Claude Code is changing the way we build software, which is what I cared about. I can barely keep up, and yet I feel like I'm so fast. So it created 3 different posts for me. And I added this image generation after the fact, just because like, I might as well do that. Why not? So these images are also generated by AI. For LinkedIn, it basically created this like longer post because LinkedIn allows about 3,000 characters. It did some references to create the credibility on the post. Then for Instagram, which I don't know if I would ever post this stuff on Instagram, but hey, why not, right? So in this, I've been chatting on Instagram a lot recently. So here we go. So building a software, what that does it look like, all sorts of like different hashtags and whatnot. And then last for Twitter, it did the same, but now it's much simpler version of it. It's transforming software building. It makes it faster and autonomous. Features here moving at lightning speed. This is such a generic thing. So next thing I want to be able to do is give it like my own tone and stuff like that. It's actually being built behind the scene right now. You can see the reasoning process of AI because I had asked for it as part of my spec on why it picked what it picked. And then you can see all the resources that it looked at. You could click on the resources, go to those resources. Gartner said X, McKinsey said Y, whatnot. In a way, this is a feature, right? Like, but all to say, when things are done right and you know how LLMs work behind the scene, you understand how the ecosystem is built, you could actually build this type of applications pretty quickly. If you were to generate a post, it's actually pretty straightforward. I don't even know what to say. Let's see. A very controversial topic. Are putting global economy in turmoil. I don't know if that is good or bad. Okay. And I can't even type with the right spellings, but that's what AI is. We'll figure out. So what it would do now is it's going to go in. It is going to go through the process of talking to LLMs, generating multiple posts, go through reasoning process, generate images. And then once those images are generated, it would basically tell me, here's everything that you should know. So we'll give it like 10, 15 seconds. It doesn't take full 60 seconds for most part. It probably would be done in like next 20, 30 seconds. And while it's doing that, Bo and I were just having fun with this. So Bo had done the same thing. And it's like, oh, I'm going to do this with my own guides that he had put together. And with that, he created his own social media app generator thing too. Well, this is done. So yeah, it generated the post. It essentially now comes in and say, have introduced significant uncertainty, yada, yada, yada. Some tags, which look like a proper tags for what it's worth. The reasoning process behind it, look at the sentiment, focus on more visual and emotional appealing, because in Instagram, craft a concise statement, and then you can see like 10 different URLs that it looked at. Now, the only thing that I need to be able to do is actually post on social, but that's going to happen some other day. Let me pause here for a second. We are
Just quick question, Nick, about the same one. Does this also, or could we be able to give a functionality to edit this post the way we want now? Because of course, I'm not gonna just post it. So is that functionality already there, or I'm just contextually asking?
So not right now, but I
Okay.
could get there. So let me actually, if you look at my history, it's actually one of the things that I was working on. One of the things that I wanted was like photorealistic images. So some of the images that it created in the beginning were not that good. So now I wanted like more photorealistic images, which is where you see like this type of figures. And then I am working on creating my own tone and having an ability to edit those things. That's work in progress. Haven't done yet, but that's what I would like use and create a new spec and just have it go through the process to generate a feature. But yeah, all to say, yes, it can be done, and I'm probably going to do it. Just not
There's
done.
just additional functions, but this is the whole tool that it was able to build by itself. Another question would be, if this is a tool which we said we're giving prompts to and it's generating something for us, every time when we hit the button, are we using Claude tokens, whatever, like the limits that we're setting up? Because in that case, I would be wary, right? Like in a month, I would be able to only create so many posts because it ran such a huge algorithm every time.
Yes. Yep. So that's a good question. So if I go to, let me, so I have this LLM service where I'm essentially focusing on enforcing like certain number of characters behind the scene just because it made sense. I could put, it is using OpenAI in this case. So it's using DALL-E for image generation, which probably might not be the best thing, but it worked for yesterday. And since it's not available to anyone, I did not care much about rate limiting, but some of those things are already built into the process. And this is why, in particular, I had added, let me go back home. I had added the login. So without login, it would basically throw 401 error so that others can't come in without logging in. And if I know who's logged in and who's using it, this is a product. At that point, I can start to charge for it. In the beginning, I didn't care much about the usage just because I care about people using it more so than the token usage and cost of it. Again, like a personal choice more so than not.
Gotcha. Good.
All right. I will stop sharing. It seems like pretty much everyone stuck around for 2 hours. Thank you so much. I'm happy to stay around, ask any questions that you may have. Also, happy to stick around after we even stop recording if you want to chat through it. If not, I'm sure I'll probably talk with everyone offline, and you know where to find me as well.
I thought Bo was sharing, so I was looking forward to that as well.
I can
Sorry
share.
I took up time.
All right, well, you asked for it, Bo, your turn.
Yeah,
Thanks, Jason.
it's not as cool as yours. So I'll really quickly just show you guys what I did here. So what I was trying to do is slightly different approach. I created these read me first files, read this first files. I'm just trying to find the thing so I can share my screen here. And with it, basically I created these files that explain, I used a previous product that I built and all of the architectural patterns, folder structures and everything that I want, everything down to how I want, domains and features and controllers structured, auth, all of that. So I did all of that. And then I prompted it with a very simple, basically like 6 steps. Like I want a social media app generator that does a lot of what Nick just showed you guys. And so it actually built like I didn't do any defining of like how to do that. It designed 3 domains, sources, posts, and campaigns. It defined the features, and it built all of that out. I did run into a hiccup where its scraping tool, it was trying to use Brave instead of DuckDuckGo, which DuckDuckGo is free. And so I had to intervene to undo that and fix it. But other than that, it did more or less what I expected. I even actually then took a step in the last 45 minutes. I went and implemented the MCP server, which was kind of cool. But the result, I can show you that, is this. So it made a nice little UI. I can give it a topic. I have a few of these that I was having fun with. So like I did Star Trek Strange New Worlds as a topic. It's not as in depth as what Nick's was doing, and I think the sources are currently limited, but you could extend that out. But same thing. It gives you the sources, and then it's just pulling together some generic posts based off of that. And this would be pretty easy to augment so that it would be more specific to different platforms. But yeah, that was the basic idea, and it came together in what I think is a pretty nice UI. No auth or anything like that, but again, those are pretty easy things to do. This whole thing, basically, not including the extra work I did with the MCP, I think it was about an hour and 15, for it to pull it together like this. So
That is great number to hear.
yeah,
No, this is great. One thing that I would just suggest, just from the realistic standpoint about this exact tool, is like having citations. I think social media sometimes care about citations. So instead of just suggestive sources, if you were able to embed any citations for those sources, just really helps the
yeah,
credibility.
Yep. And
yeah. These are all proof of concepts, but yeah.
yes, there are a couple things I want to add, like integration. So we could just say post and my own tone, type, the way I talk about it. Like I have a different style than Bo does. What are the things that I would say and I would not say? It's super generic right now. So like more things to get better at. But the fact that we could give it like few lines of description and have it generate working app in a way that I can rely on that code base was the best part that I walked away from. It's like, okay, it is possible. Now let's make it better.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining.